Hey, this is Tisha. Did you know that grief can be your greatest gift? We're going to get into that today. Today, my guest is Miss Anne Marie Schaefer, and we're going to talk about what it's like to tragically lose your spouse to a tragic accident that you actually witnessed. Welcome to the Midlife Makeover Movement. I am Tisha, your Midlife Makeover Maven, and I'm introducing you to one of my oldest, dearest, most wonderful friends, Miss Anne Marie Schaefer. And Anne Marie is probably one of my biggest heroes in that I have watched her go from situations that most of us would not have come through. And I've seen her do it not once, not twice, not more than 3 times. When I tell you she is the embodiment of what we do here at the Midlife Makeover Movement. Anne-Marie and I met in college in the 90s. We've chatted a little bit about when that was, but Anne-Marie taught me so much about life. But one of the biggest things that she taught me is just because you're white don't mean you got money. I thought erroneously from my family that if you were white, you had everything that you ever needed. And that's not true. I have never seen a woman work so hard in my entire life. And when I tell you that she has created a beautiful life for herself, coming out of so many situations that most of us probably couldn't get through, but bigger than that, one of the things I love about Anne Marie the most is that she's always saw the good in me, even when I was at my worst, even when I was at really bad situations. She's always been there for me. She's always had an encouraging word, even when she could not encourage herself. But today we're going to get into what it was like for Anne Marie to tragically watch her husband in a tragic accident pass away. And what did she do to make over her life in her 40s, to go from a situation where she could barely function to where she has created a magnificent life for herself. So, Anne Marie, let's get into it. Let's get into it.
Oh my gosh.
This is Anne Marie Schaefer. Go ahead and introduce yourself, my darling.
Hey, good morning or afternoon or whatever time you're watching this. My name is Anne Marie Schaefer, and I have so much to say and so much to share. Thank you, Tisha, for this opportunity, because if I can teach somebody or give somebody some hope and some ick, I want to do that. Like, I want to be able to say, you can do this. So my sisters and I always say, we can do hard things. We've all heard that, right? We can do hard things, but really you can. So when you talked about like when we met and like all of that, like that was in the early 90s. And I was rich to you because I had a 1971 Ford LTD. It had plush green velvet interior. It had an 8-track player and an AM radio, and it had a wooden bumper because the bumper fell off of it. It was pea green. It was the worst car. I paid $400 for that car. I drove it for like 6 years, I think.
But here's the thing. Anne Marie had a car. I was walking with my 5-year-old son at the time. We were in college, and the only way that I could get around was we were footing it. And Anne Marie, I remember her giving me a ride, and I was so ecstatic. Thank you so much for that.
It was cold. It was snowing. I'm like, you're not walking.
That was the only way I could
that
get
started it.
Yeah.
And that started it. Yeah.
That is so funny. So let's talk about where you're from and your siblings and kind of how you got to where we went to college. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay. So I grew up on the east side of Flint in a little town called Burton, Michigan. Really like a moderate sized town, but I grew up poor. I didn't know I was poor because I was lucky to have, a mom that stayed home and showed up for everything, and a dad that worked hard, and, 3 sisters and a brother and cousins. And so my grandmother lived with us for a while when we were little, and we rotated between my house and my 2 other aunts' house. So my dad had 8 brothers and sisters, so big family. So grandmother stayed with us, and we would share with the other 2 sisters because my grandmother needed 24-hour care. So the aunts were over. So there's 12 cousins in addition in this group. And so I basically had like 12 siblings. We were like the dirty dozen, we called ourselves. And we did everything, every birthday, every Christmas, every holiday, everything together. So I grew up with a really strong connection to people and a really good support system. So we didn't have money. I didn't know I was poor till I hit like late middle school and people started teasing me about my clothes. And then I just got a job and fixed that. But I didn't know that we didn't have money. I didn't know that people didn't put 5 kids and a grandmother in a 1,000 square foot house with 1 bathroom. I didn't know that that was a thing. I can't live in that much space now, but I didn't know any better. I just knew that when we came home on church on Sunday, that my Uncle Bob, my Uncle Art were sitting at the table smoking cigarettes and they were going to have donuts for us. So I knew there was always a door open. We never locked the door. Everybody was in and out. And my aunts, the women that helped my mom take care of my grandmother, were amazing role models to me. And we'll talk about that and how that really defined who I am and how I can see the good in everything. And we'll talk about a dandelion. Don't let me forget to talk about a dandelion a little bit later. And just so much love growing up. And I was the first out of all of my cousins, all of my family to go away to college. Good mentor in high school that said, you can do this. So I did. I applied to one school. I got in on probation because I didn't have good grades. I didn't have enough college prep classes because nobody taught me how to go to college. So, but I got in, 4.0 in my first semester, and I was going. And I stayed. I never went home.
So here's the difference between me and you. My first semester in college, I had a 1.25 grade point average. You had a 4.0. You were a little bit more focused than me on college. So for you, you didn't come from an environment that said, go to college. And you said there's one person that saw you, and you didn't just go to college. You didn't just go to community college. You went away to college. So how was that process and getting you prepared to how do I put this together? Nobody's ever done this before.
I just did it. I don't know. You just winged it. I didn't know what I didn't know. I knew that Flint wasn't for me. I knew that I didn't want to be at a factory, that I wanted more. I wanted more money. I wanted to travel. I wanted to see things. I wanted to do things. And that wasn't the place to do it. Like I knew for me, I mean, in the early mid 80s, all the factories were shutting down. Flint was sad. It went from a cool town to, it was not a pretty place to grow up. It was a beautiful place to grow up because of my family.
Right.
But the town, I don't want to be here. And so for me, it didn't matter what I had to do, how scary it was, whatever. I had to get out. So I wanted more. So there was no, I can't do this. I just figured out I worked 3 jobs. I mean, I always had 2 jobs in college plus college. And
you paid your way. I remember you saying in working those jobs, you were waiting tables, you were working really hard and you were paying for college on your own. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I take sometimes I do a full. So after the first year, I got a little bit of financial aid. Financial aid was weird back then. I have no idea. I didn't get more. But I got a little financial aid the first year. The second year I started waiting tables. I got a job and I started making money. I was in a fine dining restaurant. I got in. Well, the thing is, I was making too much money to get financial aid, which is crazy because I wasn't making any money. But so I just I'd save all my money and I got a second job. I was cleaning the restaurant in the mornings, then waiting tables at night because I needed that extra money to pay my rent. And I just kept working and working. And sometimes I could only take 2 classes at a time. It took me 7 years to get my bachelor's degree. But I just did it one step at a time. And sometimes I could go full time, sometimes I couldn't, but I always had at least a class.
Oh, that determination, that resilience and determination is just unbelievable. And so you graduated from college and then what happened?
We graduated college together. We watched graduation together.
We actually did. And I remember I was not as focused as you. And we were in our criminal justice classes. And I was like, oh my gosh, dysfunction. Like, I know this, like, I could figure this out. And I knew that I did not want to work in law enforcement per se, right? I really like criminal justice. Like, I really started soaring in those classes. And I think you and I had several classes together. We were kind of at the top of the class when we were together. Man, we were working really hard. And right out of college, you got a good internship that I knew absolutely nothing about. Talk about that.
No, I got it. I got an internship when I was still in college. So I was waiting tables. You know, the waiting tables were nice to people, right? We're doing the thing, and I got my stuff together, and I was waiting on this guy, this little restaurant, and he would come in a couple times a week, and he would always sit. If I was there, he'd always sit in my section. I want to sit with Anne Marie. I want to sit with Anne Marie, and he had a Diet Coke and hot wings and a hot fudge sundae. I can still remember this every single time he came in, and his little partner that came in would get whatever, but I would just show up and I'd hand him his Diet Coke and Dave's Coke and whatever they were drinking. And I'm like, the usual is the same thing. And he watched me work. And one day he came in and said, "Hey, what are you studying in college?" I'd probably been waiting on him for over a year, at least once or twice a week over a year. And I said, "Well, I'm studying criminal justice." He's like, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I'm like, "Well, I want to be a probation officer, but there's a civil service exam that you have to take that's not being offered." And he looked at me and he looked at the guy across the table and he looked back and he said, "Do you know who I am?" And I'm like, "No." "You're Jim." He's like, "No, I'm the region manager for the Department of Corrections. And when do you work again?" I said, "I'll be back on Thursday." He says, "Let me look at something. I'll be back." So he left, comes back the next Thursday for lunch, sits in my section and said, "I have a deal for you." So the civil service exam was required at the time to get hired, wasn't being offered. He said, "I just interviewed a young lady that had an exam at Michigan State and she couldn't take it, but she did a 1,040-hour internship with the civil service, and it put her at the top of the civil service band without taking the test." I'm like, "I'm in." So he's like, "All right." He said, "Put a resume together. I want you to interview with me in my office this day." So I'm like, crap. Okay. So I also waited on this guy who was a headhunter kind of thing. He was the HR guy, and he was one of my favorite people. So I'm like, "Dave, I don't even know how to write a resume. I don't know what I'm doing." I go to JCPenney's. I had a credit card and I got a blue suit, a credit card. And I said, "Dave, I don't have any money, but I can cook. So I'll make you dinner if you help me with my resume." So I traded. So bartering is really important. We still do that to this day. So I made him dinner. We built a resume that looked good, right? And I went in and I got the internship. And so it wasn't paid at first. So I'm like, okay, so I'm going to work 40 hours a week. I had 3 college classes. This is my last semester at Western Michigan University. So I have 3 college classes to finish it up. I'm now doing 40 hours a week, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 at the probation office, doing an internship. And I'm waiting tables 4 to 5 nights a week just to pay my bills. So we joke in the office that I slept with every agent in the office. Okay, I didn't. I kind of did. But every time we would go out in the field to do home calls, I know you gotta stop laughing because it's funny. We would go and check on our offenders out in the community. Every time we get in the car, I was so tired I'd fall asleep. So I'd sleep between home calls and I'd wake up and do home call. So I literally slept with every agent in the Van Buren County, Michigan probation office. Sorry. But it was just when we were doing home calls in the car, I didn't actually physically sleep with them. So, and I did it. And then I graduated and finished the internship in December of 1993. And they had an agent that was promoted to a supervisor. And I started with the department as a full agent in January of 94. Like, so I've been there since.
Wow, that's funny. See, home calls were our jam. We're going to get into that
That was
a
fun.
little bit later. Boy, we had some fun doing home calls, right? So we're out of college and we kind of lose contact with each other. I moved to Atlanta right after college. That didn't last very long, but that's a whole different story. And I came back and I was working for the state of Michigan at the time, but I was working in social services and you were working in parole. And I knew that social services wasn't for me. And I think we saw each other at the jail, believe it or not.
Yep, I think so.
And
in the parking lot, right outside the booking door. Yep.
And it's like we had never left. But I remember you saying, like, hey, we got a job coming up. And, my supervisor really wants to have a say in who he hires. And I can put in a good word for you. And you did. And kind of the rest was history from that. I don't want to go too far into that story, but what I'll say is you've always had my back. Always, always, always. And so,
Same back at you though.
yeah.
It's not a one-way street. It's not.
So you're done with college and you're in your job and you meet this beautiful man.
He was pretty. Woo.
Oh my goodness, he was so handsome. My eyes would roll every time I saw him. I was like, dang, he's so good looking. Oh my
He was. And we met, and I remember like after our first date, like he shows up at the office with a dozen roses and a card, like the next day or the week, Monday after, or whatever. So we met at a blind date. I show up at the blind date. I got like a denim shirt on and like a dark denim shirt and light denim jeans. I show up to meet him. He's got on the opposite. He's got like light denim jeans and a dark denim shirt. It's like we're like the freaking Bobbsey twins on our first date. So it was just it was one of those things that we just connected. I have my Kleenex ready, sorry, because there's gonna be tears. Ladies, just it's okay. So we
How old were you at the time?
I was 24.
Okay.
I was 24. And we met, so 94, yeah, I was 24 years old. And we just connected. It was love at first sight, basically. We met 6 months, we were engaged, a year we were married. It was good. And he was like, so remember, I wanted to get out of Flint, right? I wanted to get out of Burton, Michigan. I wanted bigger. He was pretty. He was a fraternity boy. He came from a wealthy family. He checked all the boxes, right? We're going to check all those boxes. So he was everything. He was everything to me. And I became everything to him. And we don't.
Go ahead.
So we married and we did lots of crazy stuff. We sailed boats, we refurbished boats, we traveled, we loved on each other, we did crazy stuff, we drank a lot, we socialized a lot, with all of the things. It was good.
One of the things I loved about you and Frankie was that you were always working on a project together, whether it we can talk a little bit about that, but I remember you were working in business together and you were buying houses together. And I don't know how many boats you worked on together. I mean, it was always a project between you and Frankie.
It was a lot of work, we tell you. Thank God I had a good work ethic because it worked. Because we were always doing something. We had rental properties, or he had his own business, so I was helping him with that. We would go and buy dead sailboats, we called them. So they were in the back of the boat yards with like really old registrations on them. We'd buy them for next to nothing. We'd pull them into a barn and we'd gut them, refinish them, and sail them for one summer, resell it, make a bunch of money, and then do it over again. So we lived on Lake Michigan sailing and lived in barns in the winter, freezing our butts off doing fiberglass work. But it was fun. But we were busy together. We both liked to work and we liked to grow together, and we were a good team. And so when we did things together that also helped us financially and let us do what we wanted to do, it was even better. So we were busy, and Frankie did not sleep. I swear that man, he was on about a 4 or 5 hour sleep schedule, and he was hard to keep up with. And you've already said how busy I am. So there were some things, it's not all perfect. The relationship was good. Frankie and Anne-Marie was a sentence. We were one thing, Now I'm not one thing. I'm lots of things. So when we talk about growth and we talk about change, I'm better. I was good. It wasn't always healthy. Sometimes it was controlling. Frankie was very controlling at times, not to speak ill of the dead, but I loved being his wife. I loved making him happy, and I would still be married to him this day and love him as much. Our relationship grew and it got healthier, but early on, it was not. And it took to get out of that to know that it wasn't the healthiest. I loved being in it, and I couldn't see it till later.
That? So you were in a controlling situation, and you didn't know it was controlling at the time. So how How
All
did
I
you
knew.
make that? How did you live in that environment?
Um, I worked to make him happy because if he was happy, I was happy.
Mm,
And everybody that knows me and everybody that knows Frankie knows that's true. So I'm not saying anything that's disrespectful. Um, he had me on a pedestal and I had him on a pedestal.
hmm
We thought we were perfect and we loved to project that image, right? There were some struggles at home sometimes. And I think in every relationship that's real. I don't think you can say any marriage that lasted 19 years never had an up or a down.
hmm hmm
But we genuinely loved each other and that was important. So it didn't matter that it wasn't perfect because at the end of the day, he was my person and I was his person.
And you two were married for 19 years and you chose
Mm-hmm.
not to have children.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, why? Why did you make that choice?
Uh, so when I was younger, I babysat for money. And that was never really, I'm like, ooh, that was not my thing. My sisters wanted to be moms. I'm like, this is too much. And I'm the kind of person, if I'm doing it 100%, like maybe 110. Like I'm not one to settle. And I never felt like that was something I wanted to put 110% into. My career, my marriage, my family, my cousins, my sisters, my brother, those relationships took all I had. And I knew I was not the kind of person that I wanted to do that with the family. I couldn't give that much. And I'm not one that said I could do this halfway. Mm-hmm. So we made a decision early on. And I think probably in my early 40s, we thought, well, maybe we can. But then other things happened in our lives and then other things changed. And I got a bunch of kids. I'll tell you about that story another time or later. But so I had 15 nieces and nephews. Mm-hmm. So I had kids all the time. I have relationships with them. I have them in my life. So I wasn't missing that nurturing piece. My nephews were with us every summer for weeks at a time. And my sister had triplets and wrapped that into it. So I had kids. So I didn't give birth to kids, but I had kids. So that piece was, I could give as much as I could and fill all of them up and not put one more thing on my plate.
Oh, that's awesome.
My plate was full.
It was. So you and Frankie, like one word, Anne-Marie and Frankie,
Yeah,
Frankie
sentence.
and Anne-Marie, one sentence. You had built business together. You had invested in real estate together. You had refurbished boats together. You and Frankie had a dream together that one day you were going to do what? You mind sharing that with us?
Ooh, we were going to sail away. We were working on a boat, boat after boat after boat to find the boat. And the goal was the plan was for in 2015 was our D-Day. We were going to live aboard and we were going to live on a sailboat and we were going to travel. And we were building things and making things happen so we could do that. So we were excited. We had a plan. And lots of things happened in the middle, like 2008, the market crashed and we ended up selling some of our rental properties and his business went downhill and he went back to college in 2009, which was one of the best things that happened to our relationship. Was when he got confident, he got smart, and it got better. So we talk about how things changed and grew. That was the best part of our marriage was when we knew things were hard, but we were working through and we were grown up enough. So I was thinking about when we talking about this interview, like, so the 20s are cool because we're all learning and growing, right? So our 20s, we got all these plans, we're going to do all these things. And like the 30s are cool, right? Because 30s, now we got it. We got a little money in the bank. We got our career established a little bit. Our families are set up the way we want them, kind of. So 30s are easy. And then the 40s hit, and you're like, now kind of midlife makeover kind of starts, right? So in my 40s or my 50s, the 40s are hard again because now, like, we've done the growing, we've done the stable. Now what? Like, we have this spot. And then we get to figure out maturity wise, we're grown up enough to done a bunch of stuff. This is where I want to be. But in the middle of those 40s, my life went.
So let's talk about it. So you had a plan. You and Frankie were working towards a plan. So the market crashed in 2008. It impacted you. Frankie decided he was going to go back to college, and that really helped your relationship because Frankie, it was no longer Anne-Marie and Frankie in one sentence. Frankie had his own identity. Anne-Marie now has her own identity, and I'm sure there was some growing pains in that. So you had this plan that 7 years from that point, you were going to sail away in 2015, and you were kind of building that. And what happened?
So in 2012, we lost our house. Plain and simple. We decided to do a short sale on the house that we were in. It was more than we could do. We bought a foreclosed house on a little lake. So beautiful. I'm still in it now. I love my home. It's beautiful. So we were working in the yard, and remember, we do everything ourselves. We're working hard. So there was ash borer, so we had lost a bunch of trees. We were in the backyard working, and Frankie was a big arborist. So he was used to cutting down trees and working on trees. He chainsaw carved bears, like he was, a carver as well. He's an artist. So we were in the backyard, and he cut down a tree and then went exactly where he was supposed to go. And he went, woohoo! He had set his chainsaw down. He was standing there. We were looking at it. And the reverberation from the tree that fell exactly where it was supposed to caused a branch from the tree that was above him to fall on him and crushed his skull. I was 30 feet away. So we went from woohoo to 911. I'm doing CPR. We're going to get a helicopter ride to hospital, to we're calling family in and crazy. And I can tell this kind of unemotional because I've sold it so many times. I get to the hospital, and he's in brain surgery, and my families are flying in, and I'm covered in blood. Like I changed clothes, but embedded. I could see it in my nails and my shoes and everything. It was awful. It was the worst thing ever. And 6 hours later, I'm a widow.
Okay.
And it was a lot. I got to breathe after that because I can spit it out really fast. But that was a hard day.
So let's pause for a second and unpack this because this is a lot. So you're how old at this time?
44.
And Frankie's how old?
44.
And what year is this?
2012.
So this is 3 years prior to your 2015 we're going to sail away plan. You have lived through very hard things. So in this period of time, you've lived through a short sale, you purchased a foreclosure, you've closed a business in a very short time. And now you're on the other side of it. You've got this beautiful house on a lake. You and Frankie are rebuilding your lives at this point. You're outside doing work. You're celebrating the fact that Frankie did exactly what he needed to do to cut down this tree. And a few minutes later, you witness a branch fall on your husband, and you're by yourself. And here's what we know, working in law enforcement, which we are, we spring into action. And so not only have you witnessed this tragedy, but you're also trying to save his life and get help at the same time. So in the blink of an eye, your whole life literally comes crashing down.
Yeah.
So not only do you have the tragedy of losing your husband in your 40s, you've witnessed this happen. And you're in the middle of trying to save his life, and you're just in reaction mode at this moment. And in 6 hours, your husband has passed.
Yep.
I get a phone call from you, and this is how it goes. Tisha, I'm just kind of let you know that a tree fell on Frankie's head and he died. Call me if you have questions. And I'm looking at the phone like, what? And I'm like, I can't even process it. And you were so calm at the time, which lets me know that you probably were in just, you were just moving on adrenaline at that point, right? Tell me about the days that followed.
Yeah, I had to I had to let people know. And I just had to make people, and like some people were making calls for me, but there's some people I had to call, like you know, my friend Rhonda, like I hadn't talked to in 15 years, like my best friend since birth. Because she had 5 kids, I had none, you know, how life happens. There were just some people I had to call. I mean, some of the family stuff we had to call, obviously, they were all there. My boys were there, and I'll tell you about the boys in a little bit because that's part of my support system later. They're the boys that Frankie mentored. But there was people I had to call, but it was so surreal. Like from moment to moment, I can relive every minute of the first probably 48 hours very, very clearly. Like I remember every piece. I've had nightmares. I've had memories, like every little piece. I remember when people came. I remember when people left. Now, after that first 48 hours, I'm probably a blur for a year. Well, there's things like you just got to protect your head and you got to figure out things. But there were just things I needed to do. Like I remember like one of my secretaries made a pot of beef vegetable soup, and it was the only thing I ate for 3 days. It was the most wonderful, comforting thing. It was 100 degrees in August. It was hot, but like this was important. Like somebody just showed up. Like people showed up. There's lots of people that showed up, but it was all just numb. Like it was like you do, like how do you arrange a funeral? How do you do all these things? And you know, how do you cancel the money that you just sent to his master's program? And so you can get that, you know, I'm like, shoot, I gotta get that money back. We just spent $10,000 on his next set of master's classes because he was going to school to be a special ed teacher. And he was teaching, but he was getting his master's at that point. And all of the things that are just routine, you just do, you know, and everybody's like, you're so strong. And I'm going to tell you, if you know somebody that loses somebody, do not tell them how strong they are, because they are not. They are a hamburger inside, they're ground up mess, and they are just doing what they need to do. You tell them you love them and you keep showing up. But, oh man, I was about ready to, if one more person told me I was strong, I was going to punch him. Like I seriously was so mad that people kept telling me I was strong. You don't have a choice. You have to do hard things sometimes.
So after the first maybe couple of weeks, there are people around you, and you're, you know, putting the funeral together, and you're, you know, tying up loose ends. What was it like after? Like after the people had really kind of moved back into their regular lives, what was that like for you?
Yeah, the new normal. Yeah, it was weird because like I was mad because everybody got to go back to normal. They say that you get angry about me. And everybody's like calling me and like this and that. And some of my family's calling me and they're all grieving. And, you know, like, yeah, you get to go back to your house and it's full. I got me. Thank God I had this dog. Oh my gosh, we'll talk about the dog. But, you know, Dylan,
the dog now.
So Dylan was the reason I got out of bed. He was a silver lab, and he was loyal. He wanted to be by your side, but he was not an affectionate dog. Like his idea of affection was like, he goes potty in the morning, comes, has his breakfast. He goes through your legs twice, you scratch his butt, you give him a treat, and then he's going to do his thing. And he just was not an affectionate dog, but he was exactly what I needed, because I didn't need something needy. I needed something there. And Dylan was about 3 years old at this point. And this lab was the reason I got up every morning, because he had to get food. He had to go potty. And that dog knew when I was having a bad day before I was having a bad day, because that non-affectionate dog would come up and put his head on me and lean on me, or crawl into bed and lay on top of me when he never did that before. So it's just me in the house by myself. And it was me and Frankie as a sentence, and we did everything together. We worked, but every minute we were social. We had friends, but it was empty, you know. And then you have the elephant in the room, and everybody's afraid to talk to you about it because, shoot, like, I know he's dead. I saw it. I felt it. I see it every day. So don't be afraid to talk to people about the people that if they've lost. You're not going to make them think about it because they can't not think about it.
How was it being in the house that you and Frankie shared together? Because some people can't be there
Yeah.
when a tragedy like that happens. How was that?
Well, we'd only been in the house like less than a year. So it wasn't really our home yet. And Frankie didn't die in the backyard. Remember, he was dead. I gave him CPR. He took those breaths. Even when he died immediately, it severed the artery between the two hemispheres of his brain. There's nothing. It was an instant. But he took those breaths in the backyard. In my training with my job, taught me to do CPR good, so I got him to. But he took those breaths for me. So he died at the hospital. He didn't die here. That morning, we were in the yard and I was trying to go do something else. He said, just be by me. I just like you to be in my space. I love being with you. That's one of the last conversations we had. Just sit here and dream. Let's look at what we need to do with this yard and let's plan it. Let's just do it together instead of me doing my own thing. So when we talk about like those last minutes, like it wasn't that last 6 hours of brain surgery and all that. Like, and I had to learn in my trauma to recognize that our 19 years together was not that 6 hours. Mm. And I had to learn to look at it that way and do it differently.
Yeah. So people are gone back home. You got Dylan. Dylan's the reason why you're getting up every day. At this time, you're still working. Let's talk about how did you work? What was going on in the time that Frankie passed? What did life look like in those few weeks?
Yeah. So I took 3 weeks off work after he passed away. Then I went back to work because this is what you do. You work, right? And I also had to be busy. And we'll talk about busy in a little bit and not being too busy because too busy is bad too. But I had to be busy and I went back to work after 3 weeks. It didn't last very long because I would get to work and I would work and then I put my head down on my desk and I would just cry. And I remember like my secretary called and saying, you got a phone call. I'm like, I can't take this phone call right now, but you have to. I'm like, I can't take this phone call right now. And I just hung up on her. I put my head on my desk. And then I realized like, I can't do this yet. So went to my doctor and I actually so I went back to work in September. I worked for about 6 weeks. And then the 1st of November, I ended up taking November and December off. The holidays and all of the firsts and all of those things were really, really hard. So I took a couple months off, spent some time with family, and there was it was just hard. It was so hard. Those were it's just being able to get up in the morning.
Did you lean into your family at that time or were you isolated?
No, I had lots of family. But one thing my sister Teresa, like she called me every single morning for 2 years at 7:30 in the morning or whatever on the weekend, every single day. Sometimes we'd have conversations. Sometimes she'd say, are you up? And I'm like, I'm up. So I had somebody that made sure I was checking in every day. I also had like my other sisters, somebody was at my house probably most every single weekend for the first 6 months. And that was not just my family. My husband had gone back to school, remember?
Yeah, let's talk about that.
He reinvented himself. And so I remember it's like 2009. He's like, I'm going to go back to Ferris to finish my degree. I want to be a teacher. One of Frankie's good friends had died of colon cancer. And he's like, Jeff can't go back to school, but I can. And this is what I want to do. This is what I want to be. I'm like, let's do it. Okay. Because, we're always going to do whatever for each other, to support each other. And so he went back to school and he's like, okay, remember this is the same time we're doing a short sale in our house, all this stuff's changing. And I'm like, okay, so let's figure out how to do school, how we can work part-time, we can make it happen. And he said, well, you know what? So the parking pass at the university to get a parking spot is $600. But I can spend $400 and get a parking pass and park at the fraternity house and rejoin my fraternity from the 90s. And I'm like, oh, Lord, seriously? And I'm like, it's $200. At this point in time, $200 is a big deal. So, because he's going back to being a full-time student, working part-time, we're losing some really good income for him to be a full-time student. So, okay, $200, let's make it happen. So he rejoins the fraternity. And the fraternity needed some help. We didn't have 90 guys anymore. I had 20. The house was falling apart. It was a mess. We go in and there's like these 15 guys there, 16 guys there. And Frankie just mentored them. And they ended up, long story short, which we will have to say long story shorts are never short, but he engaged with them. He did a big marketing plan. We had this telemarketing thing and we marketed the heck out of that university. They doubled the membership. He reached out to the alumni, raised $500,000 and gutted and redid the entire fraternity house with the part of the alumni team and working on that. And these young men became such good friends. And we mentored them, and like I fed them because they were all hungry, and I can cook. And we'll talk about cooking. Another podcast. That's a whole nother one. Because Anne-Marie's cooking, they're coming, right?
Yeah.
So these young men, they just start coming, and we were socializing with them before Frankie died. But when Frankie died, when I got back in the hospital, 7 of them were on my front porch waiting for me. So these young men in their early 20s just, stepped up. And I'm going to tell you, 11 years later, they're still stepping up. They're still part of my life. I still talk to them. I still socialize with them. We still visit. Now they're having kids and babies and all of those things, but they're still part of my life. So, that going back and creating that relationship, I didn't only have my sisters. I didn't have just my friends. And friends changed. We'll talk about that a little bit too, because that was a big change. But those boys, man, they were there. They were mowing my lawn. They were fixing stuff. My brother-in-law was over fixing stuff, taking care of all the things that I didn't have the physical or mental capacity to do. I had a team of people.
So I want to pause there because that is so important, right? It sounds to me like you had invested in a lot of relationships prior to you needing them. And so, because you had a big family and you had the fraternity boys and you had your friends that you had invested in, it was okay for you to fall apart a little bit because you had some people to come and carry the load a little bit, even when you couldn't carry it yourself. And I think that is important to realize that you never know which relationships you're going to lean on when, life kind of feeds you some lemons, right? And to have those folks in place that were able to just step up for you, even when you couldn't do it for yourself, is so important.
And what I needed was like a lot I got from you. You did many, many times, and some other of my really good friends. Was you didn't try to fix it. Like you just listened to me cry, and let me tell you, I thought I was out of tears, and I still have tears. There's still days that are hard. Because I'll always miss him. He'll always be part of me. I'll always have a husband. Now I'm a husband and a boyfriend, but it's hard when you lose somebody, but you just need someone not to fix it because it can't be fixed. You just want someone to be a safe place to land. And some of the people that I thought were going to be really safe places for me to land were not, because they couldn't. They were doing their own thing and their own mess.
Talk about that. Because you thought your help would come from one place and they couldn't. What do you mean when you say they couldn't?
So they were dealing with their own grief with Frankie, and they were trying to have me help them with their grief. And first of all, there's 0 rules with grief. There's not a book on it. There's lots of books on it, but personally, you can't do someone else's shit. Sorry for the late, but you can't. You cannot do anybody else's stuff. It doesn't matter who you are or what your situation is, whether it's divorce, marriage, the good stuff, the bad stuff, whatever you're celebrating or struggling with, you got to do it your way.
How did you give yourself permission, right, to grieve your way? Meaning, a lot of times, people are in grief, in their grief story, just like you said, whether it is with a spouse, whether it's divorce, whether it's whatever life change, losing a job, losing a parent, whatever. And we're not really patient enough with ourselves or other people on their grief journey, right? So how did you move from anger to grief, and how did you allow yourself, or did you even allow yourself? Did you judge yourself saying I should be further along? Like, how was that grief journey for you?
I had a good therapist who taught me And less like it is okay to only be here. It is okay to be where you're at. And there are like some things that I just couldn't do. And there's some things I still can't do today. Like I can't watch violent movies where there's any head blood. Like I can't do head blood. I can't. And I remember talking to my therapist going, man, I just can't go to the movies. I can't watch TV because like I'm afraid I'm going to see that. She's like, okay, is that something you miss or you want to do? And I'm like, no. Well, then why are you beating yourself up over something that causes you trauma if it's something that's not important to you? So I had to learn that it was okay to set some boundaries and say, my trauma created this. And I'm better now. It's not as bad. You know, there's always things that are going to be triggering for me, but I know how to process them and not be on a ball on the floor when it happens or have a full blown panic attack and not be able to breathe. So, but
Wait, pause. Was that something that was happening?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. In what situations was that happening? Was that early on? Is that something
early?
that still
Really?
talk about that?
Yeah, the first year was pretty significant. After that, they were more when I was surprised by things. But like the first year, if there was a helicopter going anywhere near me, my heart would race. I'd stop breathing. Like I had to like generally step away and pull myself together and work through some progressive relaxation techniques and some breathing techniques and everything else, and not have like that flashback that I put myself in that on the ground in the backyard again. Like I had to do that. So helicopters, blood, it were really, really triggering. He was a pilot. So I was at, and my sister knows us, we were at a soccer game for my nephews, and somebody needed a ride back to the airport, and he was getting into a little plane. And yeah, it was a mess. So like things that you don't expect to trigger you do, like you don't even know what's going to happen. All of a sudden you get tossed in the situation. But it was just really learning coping skills and how to realize that, hey, I'm not there right now. And redirecting. And that just comes with therapy and time. And you can't do it by yourself. And the people around you that haven't experienced can't help you. Mm-hmm. So professional help's okay. I was really lucky to be able to have some therapists that helped me a lot, but also just to have that solid core of people knowing they're behind me. I did it without meds. I did it without medicating myself. We started doing meds right after it happened. And I'm like, I have to feel it. I have to feel it incrementally, but I have to feel it. So when we talk about like how I got through and how I did these things is, you know, we talk about staying busy enough, but not too busy. So I had set time aside to process. So I would wake up an extra hour early. Like you said, when you're going back to work, how did you do that? Instead of getting up an hour early, I got up 2 hours early because I knew that first hour I needed to go to the bathroom and lay on the floor and cry, and then get up and take a shower and pull myself together. But I would give myself an hour. And it was from one of the books my therapist was like, set aside time to formally grieve. Like, this is my time. This is my hour or 2 hours some days or whatever. This is my time where I'm going to focus on this because it's part of me and it's going to be part of every single day for the rest of my life. I'm going to have to process this. So this is my time. For me, it was from like 6 to 7 a.m. or 5:30 to 6:30 a.m. This is my time. And then I got to do me.
I like the fact that you said you set some boundaries around that grief time. So you gave yourself permission. And it sounds like one of the ways that you did not wallow in the grief was saying, this is the time that I'm allowing myself to grieve. And then I got to get back on with my day. Mm-hmm. So it sounds to me like you were really committed to not get stuck in the grief story, that you really you were committed to getting to the other side. And that's very important.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that I didn't grieve the rest of the day. Like there weren't things and that I didn't think of it 100 times a day or whatever, but I gave myself permission just to think about only that and just be sad or just be happy. And we'll talk about in a minute. Actually, we should talk about it now. How I got to the other side of that. Like when I started seeing the better, the first thing is, when we talk about initial steps, I know that was one of the questions we're going to talk about. Like, what are the first things I did? First things, and I stopped saying, but I'm supposed to. So I stopped supposed to being myself. Like, I'm supposed to be here. I'm supposed to do this. I shouldn't do this, and I shouldn't do that. We're not supposed to do anything.
Right.
Like, in realizing that in our lives, and it, like I said, it doesn't matter what situation you're going through, we don't supposed to do anything. Like, but you're supposed, like, well, how many times have we said or expected someone else in our lives to do something for us? But they were supposed to know. They were supposed to understand. They were supposed to read my mind. I expected them. So stop supposed to being yourself and everybody else, because they don't do anything. All that does is present more problems.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask you the question, were there some people that you were surprised, or were there some relationships that shifted either out of your life or shifted into a different space that surprised you through this process?
Yeah. Yeah, a lot. Like, a lot of friends changed. A lot of relationships changed. Because remember, we were a sentence.
Okay.
So when I was just me and I just had to do me, I stopped supposed to being me, and I started putting myself first. I started setting boundaries, saying, I can't do you, I can only do me. And if you're wanting me to fill your bucket, my bucket's empty. I can't give you anything. So those ones when I stopped giving to and I couldn't fill their stuff up and they needed me, they went away. The ones that had bucket and could give back to me stayed, but some could and some couldn't. And I also had to stop being the person that I was.
What do you mean?
I couldn't be everything to everybody like I was before.
Okay.
I could only get myself out of bed. I could only do me. I could only do these things, and I could only grow myself, and I could only figure out who I was myself. Nobody was going to figure that out for me. So in your previous podcast, and we hear as women all the time, do fill your bucket up first. And,
so the people who were coming to you for a refill, you kind of had to let those people go. Like, I don't have it. And if you're only coming here to tap into what I can give you, I'm sorry, our relationship has to shift. Are those the people that went away?
Yeah. The ones that I could only give, and because I didn't have anything to give.
Yeah, so that's really hard. Like, I'm experiencing a loss right now, and that has probably been one of the hardest things that I have had to take in. But there have been people in my life who are the takers. They come to me for everything, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't have anything to give you right now. And if our relationship is based on me being there for you, it has to end, because I just don't have it. So I totally understand that. But one question I want to ask you is, when your husband passed, when Frankie passed, what was your relationship like with your in-laws?
It was good.
It was good. Okay.
It was good. Like, so, and I still talk to them to this day. It's different.
Okay.
There was a long time where I didn't talk to them. So we talk about like how, people needed for my bucket. They wanted me to do their grief for them, or they wanted to do it alongside me. And I couldn't do my grief and their grief.
Okay.
They would reach to me when they wanted me to help them with their grief. And I was so deep in it, I couldn't help them. I couldn't. And so it was hard. So in the relationships changed, but we were a super tight family. They were my family. So not only did I lose my husband, I lost a big part of my family. They were still there, but they couldn't put in my bucket. And that's not disrespectful to them, because they were doing what they could do, and I'm doing what I could do. So the relationship changed.
I want to pause here, because I think this is very important. So whether it be a death, whether it be a divorce, whether it be a shift, I think that a lot of times people do feel some kind of way when people who were once in your life are no longer there. And I guess I hadn't even thought about until now the grief that is associated with just loss, period, or when, a family unit that once was is no longer there. It's not only are the people in the middle of it grieving, it is the people that are on the periphery that are also grieving, because, as you said, Frankie and Anne Marie were one sentence. And so people who were used to that, that unit that's no longer there, they're grieving as well. And there is no, you can't say that one person grieves to a deeper level than another. Grief is grief.
Like I said, there's no rules of grief. But yeah, it wasn't just grieving my spouse, it was grieving my life, my whole life. Everything was different. And I had to figure out who I was just as Anne Marie. I'm going to tell you, that was the best part. Like when I got to that point, that was, that's when I rebuilt relationships. That was good.
Because how did you move from, I'm sure you were angry for a little while that your life was not what it was. So let's talk about how you moved from, I'm angry about my life is not what it was. I'm sure you was like, why did this happen to me? To now that's the greatest thing ever. That's a big shift. Let's talk about that. And let's go back to your sentence where you said grief was your greatest gift. What do you mean by that?
Okay. So I'm gonna back up a little bit to the first part of your question. I'll get to the grief as my greatest gift.
Okay.
I know the day that I shifted. I know I can remember it very, very, very clearly. I was back at work. It was February, so about 6 months into my grief. About that point was when my healing started. Before that, I was just functioning.
Okay.
What eating, sleeping, whatever. So it was snowing. I was working. I was in the field. I'm driving down the road. It's snowing so hard I can barely see. And and I can't see because I'm crying so hard. I'm doing a home call and I'm like driving down. I know, outside the road in Covert, Michigan, and I just pull my car over and I stop it because I can't see because I'm crying so hard and it's snowing so hard and I'm screaming in the car as loud as I can. It's not fair, like screaming. It's not fair. It's not fair. And then I'm like, okay, breathe. Let's get through all this stuff and doing all the stuff that I'd learned in my head that I'm supposed to do. And I just said, that's when I determined that my marriage and my life was not that 6 hours. And that I had to get out of my way. I had to get out of my own way and say that what happened did not define my relationship, did not define where I was going. I had to change my view of it. I had to have a shift. I had to say, every time I see that accident in my head, every time I see a helicopter, every time I see blood, every time I go back to the crying, and every time I hate just take a breath, and I need to take my coin, which was a dime in my hand. I grabbed, this is my coin. This is this moment. The other side of the coin, there's a happy memory. And every time I got sad, every time I ever overwhelmed, I put myself out in the middle of Lake Michigan sailing, or I did a time when we were laughing. Let me tell you, Frankie had the best laugh ever. Anybody that knows him knows he had the laugh. And I would just focus on something good, or I would focus something like, hey, you did this hard thing and look where you are. And I just had to turn that coin over. And I'll tell you, every time I go to a funeral now, I go with a handful of dimes or pennies or something. And I'm like, here, when it gets really bad, turn it over and think of something good and balance it. And let me tell you that you will never see me anywhere without a coin nearby. To my purse, to my pocket. Well, if it's a stressful situation, I'm putting a dime in my pocket. I just am. I'm taking it with me. It's my talisman to remember this is really hard, and it is okay to be sad, and it is okay to do this, but I gotta flip it over and I gotta focus on the good stuff. Otherwise, I'm never gonna get off this floor. And I had to get off that floor, Tish. You know it. Like I had to. So I said, this is it. So when I have to give somebody something, like when I don't know what to say, I don't say, I'm sorry. Here's a penny. Flip it over. There's no rules. It's okay. And it's really shitty. The best thing is like, man, this is really shitty. It is. And you can and I just had to find a way to get to that, motivate myself to move forward.
So let's talk about that. The day you flipped the coin over and you said, it's not all bad. So we know at that moment, the moment you say it's not all bad, it doesn't mean that it starts to be good that day.
No.
It just means that you're choosing to focus on that it's good. And it's kind of like one of those things where that was the day you got to acceptance and that
Yeah.
is what it is. And it
Right.
wasn't all bad, even though we had a bad situation, something
Mhm.
bad happened. How do I take the good of what that was to move me forward, even if it's a baby tiny step
Stop. Yeah.
along the way? And to me, it sounds like you had that little mustard seed of faith and hope that I'm still living, I'm still here. Something good has got to come from this if I will allow it.
Hmm.
That's what it was. I mean, did you kind of start taking inventory on what was good? How
Hmm.
did that
Yeah.
day in the car
So,
shifted? You said it shift, but what happened differently?
yeah, at that point now I stopped feeling so sorry for myself and started really being open to figuring out who I was. And it didn't really, it was small at first. Like the first, like I said, that first year, I don't have a tons of memories. A few little pieces, the soup, the dime, you know, some of the things, what I learned that I had to stay really busy that first year. But at 6 months at that point, I started to say, I'm staying too busy. So I had to stay busy enough to not stay in my head all the time, but I had to learn to be mindful and quiet and figure out ways to do that. And that's when I started to exercise. So that's when I started working out because I knew I needed to get out of my head sometimes. So fitness became a really big part of it. And that came from a woman. If anybody is in the situation, she's got I followed her on social media and she's One Fit Widow. And she was a big inspiration. Her name is Michelle. I don't remember her last name. But she had lost her husband tragically in a plane crash and she had two little ones. And she learned that exercise was a place where she could control and get better because we have all this stuff and there's a balance to that. So I learned how to be mindful, to slow my head down enough to process and to think and to do and learn to be quiet in my head and not be so busy all the time that I didn't take time to process. Because it is okay to be sad. It is okay to hurt. It is okay that relationships change. It is okay to grow. All those things are okay. You just have to get to the point where you give yourself permission. And I had to learn to be quiet enough in my head to learn that it was okay. And then when I started giving myself permission, that's when it started to be good.
So you started with One Fit Widow and it started with exercise. How did you rediscover your passions? When did you kind of say, you know what? There's some things that I wanted to do that I didn't do when I was married, or there's some things that I can do now. What was that journey like for you?
I decided I was never going to hang out in a barn in the middle of winter and refurbish sailboats again. Never. It was fun. That was a thing. But I had to learn that there were certain things that I did as a married person and a person who got married to the person that checked all the boxes and all of those things that I had to figure out who I was just as Anne Marie, because I was always somebody to somebody, growing up, I was always the daughter. I was always the student. I was always then I was the wife. I was never just able to do me for me. So when I stopped having to do anything for everybody, and also everybody knew what a mess I was in the situation and the trauma. So everybody quit expecting stuff from me. They stopped asking. we can't ask Anne Marie. She's a hot mess, man. Like, but we can't take anything else from her. So when everybody kind of stepped back, it allowed me to say, man, these things were really awesome in my life. These were awesome parts of my marriage. I want this again. These were things that were not good in my marriage. I don't ever want to deal with that again. These are things that I loved to do for me that I wasn't doing. And these were things that I did for somebody else that I don't want to do anymore. And I was able to kind of create these hypothetical lists in a sense. And some people need to actually write those things down. What do I want? What do I not want? What are okay? What are not okay? And I was able to separate those things. And I was finally at 44 years old, probably 45 at this point in time, able to say, what do I want? I don't have to ask permission from anybody. I don't have to take anyone else into consideration. The dog is good. He can go with me. I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. And if I don't want to, if I want to, I get to choose. And nobody has a say in that. And that was when it got good, because I got to figure out what's important to me. Because I was always a giver, right? I was always helping everybody. I was doing everything for everybody, being everything for everybody. And I finally got to say, what do I want? And you know what? At first it was scary because I had no idea.
I was going to say that. I was going to say, when the world really becomes your oyster and you get to choose and you live in a space where there's all these choices, how do you scale it back without being completely overwhelmed? How do you take the baby steps to figure it out? What things did you do to rediscover yourself?
I don't know. When my girlfriend called and said, you want to go to Russia? I said, let's go. Right.
I certainly did. Let's go to Russia. And that was a fun trip.
That was awesome. No, when I said, remember the first year, I think we were about 18 months in, I'm like, Tish, you want to go and cruise with me? So I learned to travel. There's things I wanted to do. I gave myself permission to do. I was lucky enough for those that, are following Tish and do your estate plan. I had life insurance. I'm not rich. I'm poor now because I spent all my money. And that's a whole nother story. Then my next dream's coming up.
Do not say you're poor. That is not true.
I know I'm so rich. It isn't even funny. But, I was lucky enough to have enough life insurance to pay off my house, to get rid of my bills, to pay off the funeral. So I wasn't so pressured. So get some life insurance, get it enough to cover your stuff. You're still going to have to work. Nobody's going to come independently wealthy off of life insurance because you got to live without that until you readjust your budget to one income from two. But so do that and just do what makes you happy. Because there was so much sad. Anything that would make me happy, I did. Mm-hmm. And sometimes happy was just, I'm going to go on the beach and I'm going to sit with I'm going to smuggle on a glass of wine where at a no alcohol beach. I'm going to sit there and I'm just going to watch. And I'm going to listen. And I'm going to eat the stuff I want to eat. And I'm going to cook the stuff I want to cook. I don't care if you like it or not. This is what I got. And I'm going to learn things and do things that make me happy. So I've always been a really good cook. Everybody knows that, right? Everybody knows Anne Marie's cooking, right?
Yeah.
So
in a minute.
So I learned that to me, creating and being in the kitchen and using that space and feeding people I love, but doing it in a way that I could grow and learn and study, made me better.
So when did you make peace with, I'm in midlife. This is not what I expected. I am old enough and wise enough to know what I don't want, but I'm young enough to get into what I do want. And I've got, this smorgasbord of choices. How did you keep yourself grounded into, this is who I really am. These are the things I would like to change. These are the things that I'm thankful for. And this is the direction I'm going to go next. That's a lot of questions. I know that you've thought about it, right? So you're on the other side of it. You've accepted. You're looking at the good things that have happened. And now you're in a space where you're creating the life of your dreams. Let's talk through that a little bit.
So I think, God, I don't know where to start. Reframe the first question. Give me one at a time. My head just went everywhere.
So you're in midlife. You're wise enough to know what you don't want anymore. You are in a situation where you're able now to look forward to the life that you want. How did you decide what were going to be your next steps And did you pivot along the way? Did you just kind of have it in your mind?
Yeah. Well, you know me well enough to know that I've always been driven. Like there's always been more. I always want more. I always want more. I want more. How am I going to get there? I think I finally decided that I was worth it. I think that was pivotal, like giving myself permission to say, you can do what makes you happy and it's okay. And when I finally decided, it didn't happen quickly. I had to have people in my life that also told me it was okay to do that. Because, we've always, so remember, I grew up poor. So I grew up poor. So when you're poor and you got a good job and you got good benefits and you got everything, you stay. You don't do anything. Like, you do not derail that. That's not acceptable. You're making X amount of dollar and you got a stable thing. You don't leave it. I had to wait till I got somebody in my life that was able to tell me, what? That makes no sense. So I am beyond blessed to have a partner in my life who his mother taught him to just jump and think later. So he encourages me and shakes his head at me when I don't push myself. So I finally have somebody in my corner who I trust to be my safe place to land so I can get out of my own way. And I'm not saying that I couldn't do it without him, but let me tell you, having somebody that says, you will always work harder than anybody else. So why are you waiting? I just needed someone that I trusted enough to say that. And not that I didn't have friends or family to do it. But it's different when, you're with that person and you say, I want to go to Russia. And he's like, why are you asking me? This is you. You do you. So getting into a relationship that fostered all of the growth that I've done. Who is Anne-Marie? What is Anne-Marie like? Whatever. And backed me up to tell me that what I'm doing is okay and all right. We need to hear that from people that we love. We have to have a support system. And it doesn't have to be a significant other. It can be a friend. Like, you've done it for me. How many times? You got this. I've done it for you. We've done it for other people in our lives. We've always been there for each other. No man is an island. How many times have I heard that? You cannot do it by yourself. And if you don't have people in your life that are doing it for you, find them. Because I'm going to tell you, there's people in my life that was there before, and I still love them, and they are near and dear to my heart, but they are not in my life because they don't know Anne-Marie. They know Anne-Marie and Frankie, or they knew Anne-Marie as a student, or they knew Anne-Marie as this job or that job. The people that truly know me, freaking know me. And they're going to encourage me and be there for me. And I think everybody needs that. So don't be an island. And if you need help, it's okay to ask for what you want and need. We all have to sit back and do it all. Ask for help. And if they can't give it to you or you can't give it to them, say no. It's okay to say no too.
So we're going to talk about a contrast here, because you said that with your first husband, he was a little controlling, and now you have a person in your life who says, what do you want to do? What's good for you? Let's talk about, it sounds like in that space in your earlier life, that's what you needed and that's what worked. And now you're in a different space in your life and you need something different.
Yeah.
And did it take you a while to be able to embrace that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot. So it took me long enough to actually to accept a relationship that didn't need me.
Oh.
How about that?
Pause, because that's huge. So as youngsters, a lot of times we're taught that we're the fixers, and our safety and security comes from helping other people get through what it is. How did it feel to be in relationship with someone who didn't need you? Was that scary?
Oh, so scary.
Oh.
It's like, what can I do? What do I do for him? How do I keep, what? In fact, he said to me this morning when I'm running around trying to do everything, he's like, you do not need to run this house by yourself. I said, I know. He's like, do you?
That's awesome. Let's put,
So
go ahead.
go ahead. No.
Let's put a bow on this. We have talked about your earlier life and how hard you worked to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? And we talked about you being married and being everything to your husband, and then living in the tragedy of losing him and all the things that came with it, to now being in a space where you are embracing joy and ease for yourself and putting yourself first. If you had to put some words, because it's almost like you've lived 4 lives that we've had this conversation, right? What advice would you give to others who are in our life space that have been through something that maybe they're having a hard time getting out of, or who just are maybe stuck? What advice would you give them on how to move forward?
I think it ties back to this is my greatest gift. And I don't think we ever really got to that, but all these questions can come through in that. So my greatest gift was I got to have a relationship and a marriage that was good, that made me feel fulfilled and wanted and loved and needed. And then I got to have a life where I learned to be me, and I learned to be independent, and I learned to depend only on me and to take care of myself. And then I got to learn that some things that I thought were super, super important are no longer important. And that it's okay to not live through your life through somebody else's lens, that you can refocus and reframe that lens to fit who you are right now. Because if we lived the same life our whole life, man, we'd be missing out on a lot of things. We're missing out on a lot of things. And we can do hard things and still have joy. There's so much joy in my grief. I can't even tell you the relationships that I have, the friendships that I have, the new person that I am. I don't really like a lot of things about the person that I was before my grief. But I liked that person at that point in time. But looking back, there are things that I will never do again and I will never accept again. And I also got to let myself be able to grow. And that means not be so afraid of change because I was told that this is how it's supposed to go and this is what you're supposed to do. And I got the freedom in my grief that nobody questioned when I was doing something different because they were just happy I was getting up. So the people that love you will be there. There are people that love you that can't be there. And there are new people in your life that will make your life even better if you allow it. Just don't be afraid of a relationship. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't have to be like a couple relationship. Don't be afraid to set boundaries, say no, say, I love me more, and do.
I think that's fabulous. So we've talked about you can spend your life making a plan and the plan doesn't work out, and you can spend your life being safe and safety no longer serves you. And now at this point, Miss Anne Marie is jumping into the world of entrepreneurship.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Okay. So I am investing in a gourmet mobile kitchen, not call it a food trailer. So I love to cook. I love to feed people. It makes me happy. It's also my mindfulness. Remember we talked about, like, if I'm cooking, I'm not thinking about anything else. It's my private little headspace. And so I'm building my private chef business. So it's word of mouth. I've grown and grown and grown. And now I'm investing in me. And in the next year, in March, my food kitchen will be up and running, and I'll have a licensed kitchen to work out of. And I'm going to work on personal food prep, private events. And when I need to, I'm going to park on a corner and load up some tots and have some fun. So I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to do what I've been terrified to do. And I should have. Remember the shouldas? I was supposed to do this 30 years ago, but I didn't. So I'm going to do it now because I was supposed to do this. And I just had to wait till I was ready, till I was supported and brave enough to know that I'm going to work harder on me and for me than anyone else. I want to make it happen. So watch out. It's going to be fun.
So many people don't know this, but when I was leaving Michigan, Anne Marie made this little cookbook for me of her.
Oh, I did. I forgot about that.
I still have that cookbook. And as I was moving, that was one thing that I made sure was at the top of my box, that I had that. And one time we were out making home calls. See, Anne Marie, our time used to be out making home calls. We were going to check on our probationers and parolees. We stopped at this fruit stand and they had some peaches, the best peaches you ever want to have. And we went back to her place later after we got off work, and she made some peach margaritas, and baby, they were amazing. So when I tell you, Anne Marie has always been cooking, just an absolutely amazing cook. And the last time I was at her house, she made dinner for me, and it was just incredible. And the fact that you are cooking now and you have your food trailer, it makes my heart so happy, because I know that that has been something that has just brought you joy for years. And to see you moving into your joy after everything that you've been through makes my heart so happy. And listening to you tell this story, I hope that you all get to see a glimpse of the Anne Marie that I know, who is one of the most resilient, brave, personable, loving, caring, adventurous people that I know. And to see her at this space in her life after all that she's been through makes my heart happy. So, with that being said, Miss Anne Marie and Anne Marie's Cooking, how can our audience find you?
Anne Marie's Cooking on Facebook and Instagram. All one word, ANNMARIES Cooking. So it all came from like those fraternity boys. They're like, Anne Marie's cooking? I'm coming. So they'd all show up. So that's where Anne Marie's Cookings came from. That's what's going to happen. So private chef services, I travel. It costs you, but I'll show up. So I'll go anywhere.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being my safe place to land for so many years.
Of course.
I love you.
That for each other. Oh my goodness. We have spoken a lot about your journey, and these women who will hear your story, I want them to know that it's not easy, but it's possible. And bigger than that is that you have to decide that you're going to be okay, even if you don't have the tools to do it at that moment. And you have shown, even in your grief, that your resilience shines through. And I really have, it's just been an awe-inspiring, really, to watch your journey, to know how it could have been. And you just deciding that I am going to advocate for me. And I appreciate you for that. Thank you for joining us at the Midlife Makeover Movement. And stay tuned, round 2, because we're going to talk about what friendships, like true friendships over time, have truly meant to us over these years. I love y'all. And we will talk to you soon, my friends. Is there anything, Anne Marie, that you would like to add in closing?
Just don't be afraid to embrace the hard stuff. Don't give up, because it is better. And turn that coin over when it's really, really, really hard. Turn the coin over. What's on the other side? Because you always can find something good. It just takes an effort to find it sometimes, but it's there. Just look for the good. Doesn't mean you can't be sad. Doesn't mean you can't be angry. Can't mean it's hard. Just know you don't have to stay there, and there's another side. So find it.
I love it. Thank you very much, ma'am.